Depending on how long you've been a Unitarian Universalist, you may know of Bill Schultz. The Reverend Dr. William F. Schultz served 2 terms as president of the Unitarian Universalist Association in the 80s and 90s. And since 2010, he's been president and now president emeritus of the UU Service Committee. In between, Schultz was the executive director of Amnesty International USA, and as the New York Review of Books put it, has done more than anyone in the American human rights movement to make human rights issues known in the United States. In 2006, Schultz delivered what's known as the Berry Street Essay. This has been a UU tradition for more than 200 years, making it the oldest lecture series in the United States, in North America, in fact. It now takes place between the annual meeting of the UU Ministers Association and the annual meeting of the UA, namely General Assembly, when a UU minister is invited, in the words of the Berry Street Essays Charter, to bring matters of importance to colleagues about the state of our association and our mutual pursuit of the cause and mission of Unitarian Universalism. Schultz had just about completed his 12 years as executive director of Amnesty International when he delivered his Berry Street essay on a topic clearly informed by his worldwide experiences fighting for human rights. His title was, "What Torture Has Taught Me." You can read the essay for yourself on the UU World website. As a witness to some of the worst things that one human being can do to another, Schultz found that his UU faith was impacted deeply. As he says in his essay, meeting both victims and perpetrators of torture and understanding the profound impact it has on all of us has influenced how I understand God, human beings, ministry, and the world. In particular, Schultz talks about how he tries to reconcile a world in which such brutality exists with our UU principles, principles that he himself has preached from UU pulpits. He says our doctrines about human nature, such as the UUA's affirmation of the inherent worth and dignity of every person, rest uneasily in a world full of torturers. In what sense can we defend the notion that a torturer is a person of inherent worth and dignity? This is a question in various forms that UUs have been asking ourselves for 40 years. I won't pretend that I can answer it to anyone's satisfaction, but I will explain why I don't think it's the right question to ask. For the last 40 years, Unitarian Universalists have promised one another to affirm and promote 7 principles. Marcy, please put the next picture on the screen. Here are the 7 principles as beautifully written out by Robin's father, Van. This document is framed and hanging in the calm room if you'd like to take a closer look at it. Now, when I was a brand new UU 20 years ago, once we'd run out of things to say we don't believe in, we'd say that we believe in these principles. From the first, the inherent worth and dignity of every person, through to the 7th, respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. And as a new UU, I found that somewhat confusing because surely most people would agree with most of the principles and maybe say that they believe in them too. I also heard from some people, some UUs who've been UUs for decades, and they didn't actually like the principles at all, because if these are a list of our beliefs, then that makes them a creed. and UUs do not have creeds. Since then, thankfully, we've realized that the 7 principles are not and were never intended to be a list of UU beliefs. So I'm glad that Van copied the opening sentence too, because it's very important. It says, "We, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote." The principles are not a list of UU beliefs. They are a list of moral positions that UU congregations promise to affirm and promote. They are what we promise one another. They are our covenant. Thank you, Marcy. You can stop sharing your screen. Chances are that if you've been in any sort of discussion with fellow UUs about Unitarian Universalism, the 7 principles and what it means to be a UU, sooner or later, someone will refer to the inherent worth and dignity of every person. It's the first principle and the only one that most UUs remember. And if that thread is picked up, someone will inevitably ask, or at least wonder aloud, but really? Every person? Even people who do terrible things? Even politicians and used car salesmen? And then, right on cue, Godwin's law proves itself yet again when someone asks if Hitler had inherent worth and dignity. Now, we didn't get all the way to Hitler on Wednesday evening, but we talked about this at the potluck and then during the elevator speech program, particularly around the word worth. What does it mean? Where does worth come from? If there is worth, does that also mean there is worth less? This is what Bill Schultz tries to figure out in his Berry Street essay on What Torture Has Taught Me. He says, "I suspect that we base our belief in the inherent worth of human beings on some far vaguer notion that aliveness itself is good, and that because human beings represent the pinnacle of aliveness in our own minds, we inherently possess some kind of merit. I don't buy that anymore," says Schultz. "I have fought tirelessly against the death penalty in this country, but I oppose the death penalty not because I believe that every one of those lives carries inherent worth, but because the use of executions by the state diminishes my own dignity and that of every other citizen in whose name it is enforced. In other words, I need to assign the occupants of death row worth and dignity in order to preserve my own. But I find no such characteristics inherent in either them or me." Is the worth and dignity of every person inherent, Schultz asks? No. Inherency is a construct, a useful myth perhaps, but a myth nonetheless. Each of us has to be assigned worth. It does not come automatically, and taught to behave with dignity. And then he asks the $64 question. So who does the assigning of worth? How do we decide that something is immoral? How do we know that torture is wrong? What is the basis for human rights? There are only 3 options, Schultz concludes. Rights are established by divinity, by natural law, or by pragmatic consensus. I wish we could get everybody to agree on the first 2, divinity or natural law, but the philosophical and religious clashes that have raged unceasingly and often violently since the birth of civilization prove that we cannot. So we are left with public opinion, global public opinion to be sure, but public opinion. This, Schultz says, is a discomforting notion. Now, I've found the notion of inherent worth and dignity to be a problem in a couple of more everyday situations. For one thing, it's been an excuse in many UU congregations to avoid holding people accountable for their bad behavior. Someone acts out, mistreats other people, even gets verbally abusive. Oh, we can't do anything about that because they have inherent worth and dignity. On the flip side, someone is held accountable for their bad behavior, and they respond, usually loudly, with, "You're violating my inherent worth and dignity." All of this, though, all of the theological quandaries, the moral dilemmas, and the inability to set and maintain healthy boundaries comes from thinking of the inherent worth and dignity of every person as a belief, specifically a belief about individuals. It's part of what I've started calling Unitarian individualism, because it's entirely focused on what it means to be an individual, at least within our minds. We tend to ignore the fact that we have bodies. This is no merely modern affliction. When Unitarianism was growing as a distinct religion during the 19th century, it was generally believed that people got into heaven on the basis of their own individual moral worth, what the Unitarians called salvation by character. It's why there's a joke that says the Universalists believed that God was too good to damn anyone to hell, but the Unitarians believed that they were too good to be damned to hell. Even knowing that it's part of our covenant, we can still slip so easily into saying that we believe in the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Instead of the video about covenant that we watched, I had considered the more modern We Are Unitarian Universalists video. It's newer, it's got colorful graphics. Right from the beginning, it makes clear that UUs have different beliefs. But then when it comes to introducing the 7 principles, the first is described as believing in the worthiness of every person. The fact is that we don't need to believe in the inherent worth and dignity of every person to be UUs. And the endless debates about inherency and accountability and Hitler and torturers are the red herrings of Unitarian individualism. The principles are not a list of UU beliefs. They are a list of moral positions that UU congregations promise to affirm and promote. The inherent worth and dignity of every person is not a truth statement about other people. It's a statement of our intention to treat others with dignity and respect, not because we believe they deserve it, but because we want to be good people. As the Trappist monk and author Thomas Merton put it, our job is to love others without stopping to inquire whether or not they are worthy. That's how we answer Schultz's question about how we defend the notion that a torturer is a person of inherent worth and dignity. The answer is that's a question that only makes sense out of Unitarian individualism. In terms of Unitarian Universalism, it's the wrong question. Our covenant is not a statement about who other people are. It's a statement about who we want to be. The right question is, how do we treat people with dignity and respect? For example, holding people accountable for bad behavior is how we love them. Healthy boundaries are loving, and letting bad behavior go unchecked is not loving. When it comes to someone who does bad or even terrible things, the inherent worth and dignity of every person is not a get-out-of-jail-free card. It's actually about accountability, restitution, and hopefully restoration, because that's the most loving thing we can do. I'm going to ask you some wondering questions now, and I'll give you a little time after each to reflect. Marcy will put each question on the screen as I ask it. I wonder what part of Unitarian Universalism matters most to you. I wonder how you would explain Unitarian Universalism to a non-UU. I wonder how you understand yourself as an embodied individual within Unitarian Universalism. I wonder what love is calling you to do. As most of you know, the UUA has spent the last few years working on a revision to the covenant that holds UU congregations in our association. At last year's UUA General Assembly, the proposed draft of Article 2, as it's called, was reviewed and debated and amended and voted on by the delegates at GA. And there will be another round of that at this year's GA with a final vote. Though the current Article 2 includes much more than the 7 principles, most of the attention paid to the proposed revision is in regard to the principles. That's not surprising, given how over the last 40 years, the 7 principles have come to define what it means to be a UU. Even if the principles were truly understood as a covenant and not a list of beliefs, I think that would still be the case. One of the reasons for revising the 7 principles has been that, lofty though they are in describing our aspirations, they describe a set of rather static values, practically Platonic ideals that we can affirm and promote perfectly well in our minds without ever needing to require anything of our bodies. The new Article 2, on the other hand, names 7 values and then says what we intend to do with them as part of our covenant. It doesn't just name the values as Platonic ideals, but describes how we want to embody them in our lives. For example, the value of equity, about which you'll hear much more when Beck preaches in 2 weeks, currently says we declare that every person has the right to flourish with inherent dignity and worthiness. We covenant to use our time, wisdom, attention, and money to build and sustain fully accessible and inclusive communities. That's why I decided to include the 30 Days of Love embodied meditation from the Reverend Catherine Clarenbach in this service, because we are not brains in jars. Our bodies are part of this world, and what we do with them matters much more than the thoughts we have in our heads. Mind like the sky, yes, but also heart like the sea and body like the mountain. In our daily living, may we show our values in our words and our deeds. May we discern what love is calling us to do, and may we always remember that how we treat one another is about who we are and who we want to be as a community. May it be so.